Good afternoon. My name is Carolina Albernas, and I'm Director of Business Development and Operations at the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce here in Toronto. We would like to welcome you to our webinar today on the importance of organizational culture and addressing gender equality and diversity. Our guest speaker is Jamile Cruz, founder and executive director at IND 101, a consulting firm specializing in inclusion, diversity strategy development and implementation. With international experience across multiple industries, she has spent over 18 years with clients transforming business in high-performance organizations, creating and implementing strategies to reduce operational costs and achieve their business goals. She's now driven to share her knowledge and experience to create a greater social impact. Jamile also serves as a board member of Women in Mining Canada, and she's the chair of the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Now I'm passing the word to Jamile.
Thank you, Carolina. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm very excited to be speaking to you today about the work that we do at IND 101 and the state of inclusion and diversity, hopefully touching a little bit here in Canada as well as what happens in Brazil. What I thought about doing today is really talking a little bit more about my experience, what got me to open IND 101 and address questions around inclusion and diversity. Some of the definitions that we are using and use around organizations, touch on the business case, as it is important that people understand the impact that this can have on business. Talk a little bit about the consulting side, so understanding the maturity curve and the steps that it takes for you to get to a dynamic position where IND is really connected to the work that your organization does. And the big piece that it's the shaping of a culture. As well as unconscious bias. We talk a lot about it, but I sometimes get the feeling that people are not quite sure how to address them. So we're just going to touch a little bit on unconscious bias and have a little bit of time for questions from you. So just to expand a little bit on the presentation that Carolina did for myself. So my name is Jamile Cruz. I'm the founder and executive director of IND 101. And my career started actually in Brazil. I studied telecommunications back in São José dos Campos, where I'm from. And after graduating, I worked at Ericsson for a few years. And Ericsson would be a good example of companies actually investing money back in education. My course had from equipment to professors coming from this technical organization and allowing a lot of students to enter in this. At the time, new sector in Brazil was right when GSM technology was getting to Brazil, and we didn't have the equipment or the technical expertise to manage the whole transformation that was happening with the privatization of telecom for the Brazilian market. So that's how I started my technical career. And from there, I decided to study electrical engineering, worked for Embraer for a little bit, and then had this strong feeling about wanting to travel. And that's how I ended up first in the US. I worked for MasterCard for a year and then moved to Hatch, which is an engineering consulting firm here in Canada, where I spent, I would say, my forming years as a technical engineer and a mining electrical engineer, where I designed substations and electrical power distributions for mining. And from there, I joined Vale, which is a Brazilian company. At the time, they had just purchased Inco, which was the Canadian nickel company. And I moved to Saskatchewan. For those who might join us from Brazil, Saskatchewan is a province here in Canada in the middle of the country. So if you look at the Canadian map and try to put your finger in the middle, you will find Saskatchewan. And I lived in Regina for a little bit. From there, joined management consulting. I started my career at Accenture, doing advisory for mining organizations around digital strategy and project controls. And with Accenture, it's when I guess, got myself more involved with the discussions around women in mining and inclusion and diversity as a whole. I had the opportunity to speak in a few conferences and discuss the topic with specialists. And in every client that I worked, we are always doing big transformation projects, and it always surprised me how much or how little time we spend on really understanding the people who are involved in those projects and how to get the best of each one of them. So that's kind of what excited me about projects, of understanding everybody who was part of the game and needed to contribute to get to the end of the game with a successful project. So when I had the opportunity, I put my hand up, asked for the role, and becoming the inclusion diversity lead for Accenture Canada. And with the work, I just loved it and thought that there was an opportunity to do that for other organizations and help them to understand how to adjust their culture and how to think about inclusion, diversity in a more structured way, different from the conversations that we have today that tends to be very conceptual and doesn't land on the progress that we wish to accomplish. And last year I decided to essentially start my own company. It's called IND 101, which stands for Inclusion Diversity 101. And here I am helping organizations get somewhere. And we're going to get into more the details of the work in a minute. If you have any questions, write them down, put on the chat. We have a group here taking the questions, and we're going to discuss them at the Q&A, so don't miss the opportunity. So what do? We actually say that our focus is really on the inclusion side of the equation. So we focus on inclusion to shape cultures that enable your diversity to work. And when we say diversity, we're really not just focused on people of color or people with disabilities. We're actually looking at the larger spectrum, so women and everybody who currently is underrepresented in the organizations. And also, when we talk about inclusion, it's clear that each one of us, it's always dealing with some element in our lives that creates a level of diversity, being a situation with your family, having to take care of elderly parents in your home and multi-generation homes. And there's so many aspects that can actually impact the way you perform at work. So when you talk about diversity and inclusive policies, we talk about actually respecting the people who comes to work in the organization as human beings and understanding that everybody's dealing with something at any point in their careers. On the definition side, we just like to always ground people on what it means to talk about inclusion and diversity. So inclusion, understand as the shaping of a culture where all the members feel accepted, are treated fairly, that are inspired to participate and feel a sense of belonging within that organization or that group. And diversity really being representation. So when we talk about diversity, we're really thinking about all those things, visible and invisible that are out there. And one without the other really makes this equation of what we call the culture, right? So culture is the consistent, observable patterns of behavior that we see in any group, in any society, in any organization. So having those inclusive behaviors showcased day after day, it's what turns a culture into an inclusive culture. So a big question when we start talking about inclusion diversity is really around the business case. People want to know, what is the return on investment? What is the impact on the business? Are we doing just because it's the right thing? We have our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, always saying that it's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. And I don't believe that is just a tagline. There is a lot of research. There's a lot of information all over the place that supports that case. So here I just have a few points from McKinsey and Deloitte that showcases the factor that 75% more ideas prioritized when you have a more inclusive team, that you have 31% more responsiveness to customer needs. And we know that every organization, the work of a lot of people is always focused on engagement, and diverse and inclusive workplaces creates a bigger engagement, and better engagement drives better business. The other thing to know about inclusion diversity, as any business priority, is actually it starts at the top. So we can't, or there are organizations where inclusion diversity strategies start from like the ground level where people are feeling sometimes discriminated, sometimes seeing issues within the corporation and start asking for the support of the board members or executive team to support. But those are more difficult to actually have the impact and the change in culture that we expect to see. So we do need set support from leadership to see that the results that we're talking about. Also, there's a lot of research showcasing how board members or boards perform better. So there's higher quality on decision making, sharper monitoring, and like corporate social responsibility focus and lower financial risk tolerance when you have a more diverse team. And the big one that we talk a lot about these days, it's the relationship of diversity and innovation. So companies with more diverse leadership teams report higher innovation revenue. So if you see the chart there, this is a study from BCG done in Europe, and they actually look into multiple diversity dimensions. So industry background, country of origin, gender, age, and others. And you see there's like a 19% difference on the bottom line for business with revenue associated with innovation when they have more diverse teams. And one of the big things that we see nowadays that it's one of the big challenges that I see with making progress on inclusion and diversity. It's really this concept that you can hire an inclusion diversity lead or just create a strategy to put on your website and not look at inclusion diversity as a whole and how it impacts every single layer of your business. So when we start looking with organizations on their inclusion diversity policies and strategy, it's really about understanding legislation that's about to come and if they're prepared to comply. What are the issues around their own organization? Every organization is different, every culture is different. So really looking at how does it impact, how it waves with the strategy, how is that associated with their strategic goals and the business outcomes that they expect. Understanding that it's a change management process, it is a transformation project. There's a lot to do with culture and behavior. There is a piece around leadership, right? You need to be able to activate your leaders to model those behaviors we're talking about. There's a lot of questions today with Me Too and other things around the reputation in the market. So you need to understand how that impacts you and what's the current situation in your business. And also around technology, right? We're talking about AI, we're talking about multiple things that we're already proving the impact that it has when only one specific group is able or participating on the design of this new technology. Plus, there is inclusive design methodologies that can be used when we're designing to include people with disabilities, when just to give more access and be more inclusive of all. And then in terms of maturity, every business and in every single thing that you're trying to accomplish, there's always a starting point and the point that you're aiming towards. So this is a maturity curve that we use from a business perspective on inclusion and diversity. So it really goes from this inactive point all the way to dynamic. And the relationship that we make here to get people really to understand what we're discussing is that we say that inclusion and diversity today, it's really where safety and quality were 30 years ago, right? So if you look into organizations being heavy industry, construction, whatever you want to look at, there was this question around quality and safety and accidents happening. And there was the idea of control of quality, the idea of control of safety, but it wasn't established in a way where you had all sorts of conformance, full-on health and safety teams taking care of projects, designing with health and safety elements in mind. And today, it's a full industry, right? It's a very mature industry that those elements are included in legislation from province to federal. Every company has to report, right? It's the same case with sustainability. And my hopes is that inclusion diversity doesn't take 30 years for us to get there, but it is feeling like early days where people are still trying to understand how they get impacted and what to do around it. And one of the things that I usually challenge organizations is if I need to add an extra box there on my maturity curve, and that box would read somewhere around delusional, where companies, unfortunately, we still see a few leaders and a few perspectives that want to challenge the perception of the existence of a problem. So sometimes they will say it's a business priority because they felt the pressure from the market and feeling like there is a need to talk about inclusion and diversity. But when you actually start probing and questioning leaders, they're like, well, we really don't think that applies here. We don't think we have a problem. And you look at their corporation, it's not representative of the communities they operate, or it's not representative of anything. One of the checks that I tell leaders when they say that to me to do right away, it's like, did you take subway if you're in Toronto? Did you take the subway from home to work? And they're like, yeah, or hopefully they didn't drive with the chaos that is in Toronto. But if they took the subway, the next question is, did you walk into your office and you felt like you're still on the subway, or you feel like you walk into a Nordic country? And usually it feels like Scandinavia in a lot of companies around here is still nothing wrong with it, but there is a concept there that we're not very representative of our communities, and there is some work to do to be more inclusive of the communities we have in our everyday. So the ultimate goal for every organization, if I ask this question, it's really the highest performer, right? The top of the chain, like the best in the market. And high-performing organizations tend to put this very high value on value creation. So the people who get the most money, who get the most recognition, they're part of this core group, being the sales team, being the product developers, if it's an engineering company, the engineers. And there's always, for every organization, a business operation group, which it which has all the internal functions. And then there's also people development, which we understand as HR. And if you put these groups together, some companies would even call them as overheads because it's not the core business. And then we have on the chart here kind of the foundation being the culture and the core values, which it is an exercise that you do when you're setting up a company to really think like, what's my mission? What's my vision? What are the core values that we want to establish? But a lot of the times this gets lost with this goal of really trying to get to profit and get to that value creation, and value being understood as cost, and forgetting on the way the people were directly associated with that value. So what we want to create here is the understanding that every single layer of this pyramid, with the foundation being culture and core values, have a real value for the creation of the goals and for the development and performing of this organization. So we talk a lot about culture, and the question really becomes, how do you shift and how do you shape the culture to become what you expect, and how to become a more inclusive culture? The step number one is really to start with the business. So that definition of what you're trying to accomplish and why, it's key. So defining exactly what is your company there for, what is the organization trying to reach, and have a story that every single person in that organization understands. Then you go to step number two, which would be really declare the values, right? What values will form the basis of the culture that we want to build to accomplish these goals? Most companies kind of stop at number two. So if you search most organizations, you're going to find the values list on their website. What you don't find are the behaviors that are associated with those values. So when I say integrity, respect for the individual, what does that mean? Because people might have different interpretations of it. And unless the behaviors associated with it are clear, you're always going to have a very hard time on applying consequences when people essentially misbehave. And we see a lot of that in a lot of business. Once you declare the values and you specify the behaviors, very important is to activate your leadership. So what will your leaders say and do to model and inspire others to create that culture we're discussing? And after the leaders started modeling that, how do you create accountability? How do you align this whole systems, process, and people to encourage the right behaviors from everyone in your organization? and of course measure progress. And on inclusion diversity, even better, it's when you publish this progress, put on your website, put on your sustainability report, on your business report, to ensure that the progress not just within the organization, but everybody's actually holding you accountable. So from the work that we've been doing the past few years, few of the things that we've learned on the question around moving the dial, the question that I usually ask is, are we moving the right dial? Because there is a lot of focus on diversity, but very little inclusion. So the three things that I wanted to point out here is that first, we need to understand that every person is progressing on that maturity curve. So we are learning about our own biases. We're learning what does it take to be more inclusive and get people to participate and make space for everybody to be part of our organization. So we need to understand that there is a maturity curve there for every individual, and we need to respect that. Of course, find ways to accelerate the progress, but we need to respect that factor. Number two, it's unpack I&D into hard and soft. I don't love the word soft, but people understand as hard and soft skills a lot of times, or they put on those boxes. And there is a diversity dial and there is an inclusion dial. So every time that you change recruiting to say, I'm going to hire more women, or I'm going to make space and hire more people of color, you need to look into the systems inside the organization, into the potential bias inside the organization, to ensure that once they walk into the door, that they're actually active members and feeling like they can work in the organization to the best of their to give the best performance, knowing that they're going to be recognized. And three, be open to rethink and address ecosystems. A lot of the times when a company is having issues with women leaving, for example, the first thing that they're going to try to do is to create a women development course, when essentially pointing the finger and saying, well, we need to develop better our women because they're not ready to be leaders, when most of the time it's really the bias embedded in the promotion systems and the way they're being treated that essentially makes them leave, and not their lack of desire or lack of ability to be leaders. So there's a lot of like look inside and look in the mirror versus pointing fingers towards the subrepresented group. And then two things that each one of us can do, and once I talk a little bit of unconscious bias, I'll give more steps there. But within organizations, two things that are very easy to do and it can generate more progress. One, it's to always ask yourself when you walk into meetings, when you walk into your group on an everyday basis, is who is not at the table, who does not have a voice, right? You're running a meeting, there's 10 people there, but there's 2 people that are the people who talk. And usually if they're the people who talk, they are the people who talk in every single meeting. Who did not have a chance, open the floor, ask the people to make silence for a bit and call Jane, call Jonathan and say, do you have something you wanted to say? I know you have ideas here, please contribute. We want to hear our voice. So make this space. And number 2 is start every meeting with an inclusion diversity share. Within mining organizations or the heavy industry as a whole, to turn the table into health and safety and get to what it is today, one of the things that most companies did is to start every meeting with a health and safety share. And that first opens the conversation, second brings to the table current issues so people can learn how to address them. And here's the same concept. So if you start every meeting with someone sharing an inclusion issue or a diversity issue, you're just going to open for that conversation. People are going to feel more comfortable speaking up. It might be very uncomfortable at the beginning, but you need to start somewhere. And I just want to touch quickly on unconscious bias. It is a word that we talk a lot about for those who saw the issues that we had, I think now probably 2 years ago with Starbucks, with some of the racial issues in the United States and other companies. I think Sephora was this year with treating, in US ends up being a lot of racial issues, but we've seen that happen to women. We've seen that happen to many groups. It's usually attributed to unconscious bias, and the first reaction from organizations is to give everybody unconscious bias training. I want to touch on here. I don't recommend to companies to give that as the solution for all. I do think it's important for everybody to know what unconscious bias is and really do a self-assessment and understand ways of mitigating it and ways of addressing their own bias. So it is one of the tools you can use to really engage people and get them moving into their own maturity curve. But yeah, don't use that as a solution to fix it all and fix diversity and inclusion in your organization. So what it is really bias. They influence your decisions and behaviors in ways that are there and you most times don't notice, complete escape your consciousness. So implicit attitudes, actions, decisions, this automatic evaluation that we do of other people. The simplest way I can explain is the fact that you're going to put someone in a box before they even said, "Hi, how are you?" So you look at someone, you assess them based on what they're dressing, the way they speak, the way they look, the type of hair, the color of their skin. So, and that comes from the culture you grew up with, the way your family behaves, and all these influences that you have on your day to day, and manifest themselves as these micro behaviors that we just play on a daily basis, but we don't take notice. And what isn't, and controversial there, we have a few politicians that just play a lot of examples of what it isn't, but I won't cite names here, but explicit attitude, action and decisions that are very directed to specific groups, that the person is definitely conscious of what those are, and you can get rid of it if you want, and it's definitely not an excuse for not embracing diversity. So I sometimes do hear people talking about unconscious bias when I was like, no, that was very deliberate. It is a bias that it's clearly conscious, so we need to be aware of calling out bias as well. And the most common types of bias, it's really first impression. So as I said, first impression also comes with like the boxing. So it can be positive sometimes, but most times we tend to use them for negative things. So this generalization of someone based on a group that they belong to, ignoring the individual differences. There is also the similar to me effect. So this plays a lot in recruiting process in organizations. So there's a tendency of individuals to rate other people based on their the similarity to their own, right? So if you look at someone who came from the same place, was born in the same place, went to the same college, whatever reasons you find, you're going to have this tendency to like them better than others. And then confirmation bias, which is what we see with the issues around elections and Facebook and others, where they're going to essentially understand the patterns of your behaviors and what you look for in the internet, for example, and just keep throwing things at you that you already have the tendency to like. We do that with people as well, right? So you ask them a question in the interview. If they said something you like, you're just going to continue your interview questions if you already like that person in a sequence that are going to allow them to showcase their best instead of following a script and giving everybody who's going to come after the same opportunity. So knowing those biases, what we need to do really to change our ways around unconscious bias, it's becoming aware of blind spots. If you search online for blind spots on unconscious bias, there are videos, there are exercises that you can do. But here are just basic things that I put on my clothing line here. It's the IND 101 t-shirts and bags. So you can go from like giving yourself a bit more time for decision making, really question your first impression, ask for feedback of other people on the bias that you're demonstrating. Like, you know, of course, you need to be open for that feedback. But if you ask people around you to say, do I demonstrate bias about this specific group, usually people do notice those things and they can tell you if you're comfortable asking. And really checking your assumptions. It's like, am I judging this person based on what they told me and what they shared with me, or am I just putting them in a box before even giving a chance? And practicing disrupting this bias is really trying to justify your decision. So ask others to do so too. Have I decided on this person? What are the reasons why? I just thought they fit in with my group, or I like them. Like, no, let's talk about the specifics. creating this culture of calling bias. So if you see something, say something, right? You saw someone doing something that didn't feel quite right, say something. Make decisions collective, include a diverse group on it. So try to make more diverse decisions and empower others to call it out. And I have here a list of practicing inclusive behaviors and very basic things that if we keep that in mind as our mantra for our daily basis, it would help everybody. So I touched on a few of these items already. So it's really about listening, giving space for people who usually don't have a voice or are not finding their voice, consider everyone's views and perspectives. So this does bring new ideas to the table. So, and also help yourself expanding your opinions and visions. Speak up. It's the basic TTC health and safety thing. If you see something, say something. Most of the time when there is a situation of discrimination or harassment for the person who is suffering, the first reaction is usually shock. It's very hard to find the right thing to say or call it out when it's happening to you. So if you're watching a situation like that, lend your voice to the person, say something. Check your assumptions. Are they true? Are you making assumptions based on the individual you met or on stereotype that you're carrying? And be authentic. Every time you show your authentic self, you allow others and encourage others to be authentic too. So be yourself, essentially. And here, just a little bit of IND 101 for you. This is our approach. This is the way we work with organizations. So we help them on the definition of an ambition. So agreeing on strategic goals, understanding what's the leadership trying to achieve based on a workshop that we run with them. Then we run into a diagnostic where based on the ambition, we're going to define current state, where you are today and what it takes for you to get where you want to be. And then with that diagnostic in hand, we're going to essentially create a set of tools for you to actually execute. So then we do a co-creation of solutions and help you create the capabilities within your group and your organization to implement those solutions. And of course, stay in touch to help you ensure that there's a sustainability to those benefits created. And I think we're reaching here to the last slide. So just a little bit more about the company. We have over 20 years of experience in business transformation, strategy execution, behavior science, culture change, and inclusion diversity. So we're ready to work with clients in Canada and in Brazil, and hope to hear from some of you once you have a chance to watch these again and have any questions. So I'm going to open up now for questions, and I hope you enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Jamile. Thank you so much for all our presentations. So I'm opening for questions now. Questions coming in. So first question here is, hi Jamile, for speech. I want to know what are some of the key differences you see when treating the subject with organizations in Brazil and Canada?
Perfect. I love that question. There's actually an article, and I think BCCC has shared on the social media. So if you're interested to read the full article, it's out there, and it's around the differences, mostly focused on gender, but IND as a whole for both countries. What I would say is that there is, if you think about the maturity curve that we just seen and discussed, I think there is steps towards a bigger maturity in Canada than in Brazil. I think there is a level of acceptance within the culture because it is a culture built around this immigration strategy and the acceptance that there are many cultures that build up to be the Canada that it is today. So we see this difference on the street. and it is accepted for a lot of organizations that that difference should also be seen within the organizations, and there's clear benefits to innovation, to the bottom line, when you include everybody. So I would just say that on that maturity curve and aspects of the culture of Canada supports a little bit, and it makes it a little bit easier to have the discussions and the progress within inclusion and diversity, plus the government. Justin Trudeau, when he entered the office with the establishment of a feminist agenda, the government of Canada has moved kind of much farther just by having that government support. I remember talking to CEOs in the past, and they would say things like, "Well, if Justin Trudeau did it, I can do it again. I can do it as well." So that kind of support of watching kind of the biggest CEO of the country, the Prime Minister, actually managing the situation and pushing an agenda so strongly in-house and also internationally, creates a situation where it makes it a little bit easier to have the conversation and create progress. Where I think in Brazil, a lot of the times it's one step forward and 5 steps backwards. I think there is a movement in Brazil happening now with a lot of different organizations, for profit and not for profit, and large organizations really signing in, because we do have a lot of global organizations operating in Brazil, bringing this concept that women have to have a space and be better treated and be on the top leadership. So I think with time, hopefully, we are all going to get to a better place. I hope I answered the question.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So thank you for your answer. We have another question coming in. Mm-hmm. So we know that on top of being a member of the Board of Women in Mining Canada, you're also participating on the launch of Women in Mining Brazil and the development of an action plan. Could you please tell us a little bit more about this project?
For sure. So very excited about this project. We actually had the kickoff here in Canada during PDAC. PDAC is a large mining industry conference hosted every year here in Toronto in February, for those who don't know. Women in Mining Canada have been operating for many years. I've been elected into the board only this year, but this project with Brazil already existed. Women in Mining Canada, with sponsorship and support and financing from Status of Women Canada, created an action plan for the mining organizations operating in Canada, and it's a great action plan with all these strategies, with a discussion around inclusion, a discussion around the business case. It's very complete and very well displayed and executed. What the proposal was with Brazil, it's in conjunction with IBAN, which is the Mining Institute of Brazil, a few of the sponsors, one of them being Vale and Vale Foundation, BCCC and CCBC in Brazil, which is the chamber over there, and a few other players, was to come together and first give the support required to create Women in Mining Brazil, and second, create an action plan with a call to action to actually getting mining companies in Brazil understanding the impact of creating a better gender balanced industry, give more space, become more inclusive. So we defined the steps that we're going to execute to get to December and publish an action plan. I was in Brazil in August running a workshop where the intention was really to address the strategies that are in the Canadian action plan and see what needed to be adapted to make them work for the Brazilian reality. And now the next steps, I'm actually flying to Brazil this Thursday, and we're going to be presenting and creating an engagement plan with leaders during Expo Zibran in a 3-hour session on September 10th. So the idea there is really to answer the question of the best ways to engage with every single mining company and supplier for the mining ecosystem, and figure out ways that we can really get them to agree or commit to some of these strategies on the action plan and start creating this progress we want to see. That's it. Do we have any more questions? Carolina, we can hear you.
So we have one more question. How do you see the advancement of inclusion and diversity among companies if it really exists here in Canada?
Sorry, say it again. How do
you see the advancement of inclusion and diversity among the Canadian companies, like versus the Brazilian companies?
Yeah, similar to what I discussed in the first, I think there is engagement from a few organizations. So in Canada, I think we're going to be able to list a lot of organizations who are doing great work. Canada has the awards with the top 100 most diverse organizations that we all can search. It's published every year, I think, in the Globe and Mail, and there's a big ceremony where they give the award. So there is already assessments put in place, and I think companies are more aware of the investment requirements and ESG, so the environmental and sustainability goals are very or governance goals are very associated with gender equality as well, right? UN, United Nations published these sustainability goals, and companies are being encouraged to actually really like display their progress in each one of them. And I feel like Canadian companies definitely embrace the concept and have been pushing very hard in a few of the fields to display that commitment, similar to what the government of Canada did. When we talk about Brazil, as I mentioned, there are a few companies that I would like to highlight. So like Nubank, it's a company that I learned about them not long ago. It's a fintech company, not very old, and they're doing amazing things. Like if you look at their percentage of LGBTQ people within their organization, it's through the sky, and all based on a culture where they are welcoming everybody, asking them to be who they are and be authentic because they're embracing innovation and they want to create this new, I think some of their things, it's really to create a new way of doing banking, and they're already expanding to Argentina. They have a diversity even on the founders, so it's a Brazilian woman, it's I think a Mexican and an American. So just the way they're building up the company, it's very interesting to watch. Another example, which is an Italian company, it's not Brazilian or Canadian, but they operate in all these places, and it's worth watching and seeing what they've done. I would say it's Barilla. It's the blue pasta package that we find on the market. They had one of those cases that you start caring about inclusion diversity because of a reputation issue. You can check their story on their website, but there was an issue with a chairman on something that was said about the LGBT groups. And with that and the loss of market share and everything that happened in sequence to that event, generated this requirement or this need for them to understand the impact of inclusion diversity, the impact of investing in it, and really changing the game for their corporation and becoming an example of what to do. So I think in Canada and Brazil, if we search, we would find a lot of companies that we could use as examples. Unfortunately, it's not a massive number yet of great examples and real progress, but there's a lot of organizations out there that are really trying to do a better job.
Thank you. Yeah, no, Nubank is a very interesting case. They're one of the first Brazilian unicorns, and they just launched as well in Mexico. And Barilla, I remember really well when it happened, the comments and the change that we saw, including their ads and how they approached the market as well. It was a forced change, but it was a forced change for good. So, and then last question, because we're running out of time. So in Brazil, we see a lot of discussions how companies are now looking into inclusion diversities, but we're not really seeing a lot of change in hiring for management. So we still have a very low ratio of women in management positions. Canada, do you see Canada differently? Like, is Canada suffering for the same thing, or do you think here it has changed already?
So the unfortunate thing is that the more we talk about it, the less progress we've been making. It's the sad news. Hopefully, at the end of this year, we're going to course correct and start making progress forward again. But I think there is an adjustment to everything that's happening, right? I think we always tend to push a little bit to the extreme until we find kind of middle ground in different things. But a difference of Brazil and Canada is that in Canada, we have established organizations who are pushing really hard towards putting women in top leadership roles and boards. So you have 30% Club Canada, which push for women's on board, and companies who are signatory, they essentially agree to a timeline to add 30% women in their boards. You have Catalyst, who operates in Canada, US, Europe, and I think Japan, if I'm not mistaken. So you have these not-for-profits who are gaining a lot of momentum and pushing the bar and getting companies to first really understand what it means and what it takes, and then agreeing to participate. In Brazil, I was talking yesterday with someone who I think is going to participate on this event that I mentioned on September 10th, but there's like Movimento 360, which is essentially founded by a lot of organizations who believe on this exercise as well, that more women should participate in leadership, and this movement's it's starting to gain momentum as well, and getting more industries to join. So I do think it's a power of the collective, and we do need to get together and use powerful organizations like the government of Canada, right? The projects that I'm doing with Brazil, Canada is super involved, and it's always showcasing what we do here and why it matters. And like I have a lot to thank to Consul Evelyn Colomb, who has shown to every single event that I had to date, and she always talks about the business case with discussion, with the examples that you can use from Canada, examples from the companies here who are doing the work, and actually showcasing on the bottom line as well, right? Showing that yes, there is work, yes, there is investment, but also there is an impact to your business, and it's a very positive one. So I don't think we made as much progress as we'd like to say that we've done, but I think we're going in the right direction.
Perfect. Well, I would like to thank everyone who joined us today. I would like to thank Jamile for this amazing presentation, for clarifying some points with us on how an organization should do with diversity and inclusion. If you have any questions, any further questions for Jamile, her email is on the presentation, jamile.cruz@ind101.com. And this video will be posted on our website very soon, so you can rewatch it. If you miss it for some reason, please rewatch, send questions to Jamile. You can send questions to us, and we'll pass the information along with Jamile. Again, thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you, Jamile, and I'll see you all soon in our next episode of the BCCC webinar series. Thank you so much.
Thank you.